The Philippines has a wide variety of entertainment. This can be seen in poems, stories, movies, songs, books, the list goes on and on. But in this video, I'm mentioning everything that falls under these categories: traditional and subversion, the nation and beyond, and body and desire. This course has exposed me to many Filipino-made works that I've never seen before. Granted, some were familiar, the exposure to the more underground materials really moved me. I felt as though I had a wide universe left to discover. So let's start with this. Philippine literature is ancient. We live in the digital age and like things the way they are now. Efficiency and speed is key. It's quite rare to find people who like to just sit down and read books, let alone written by a Filipino author. There's something quite fascinating hidden in these pages. Like any other culture, ours is full of myths and legends, beliefs and encantos. This module refreshed my mind. When I was a child, I would hear all kinds of stories about spirits and entities living in the woods. They walk among us, they say. My personal favorite is the manananggal. She's a woman who, in the night, separates from her body below the torso. She then flies in the air hunting for prey. You see, our mythology is quite complex. It has a unique way of existing. Stories like these are passed down from one generation to the next. They were told by our ancestors by tongue. Then, in turn, it was told over and over again until it was written down. Even though every story had the same essence, everyone's version was different from one another. For example, according to my friend, she knew the manananggal to be able to shapeshift even in the day, into a goat to be specific, in order to hide herself if she needed to. I did not know this. All that I know is that she separated from her body, flew, and ate men. Knowing her version, it gave a little bonus to mine. I certainly think that our stories deserve more attention. These days, it's quite hard. We receive media and entertainment in every direction, on every platform, on demand. It feels as though what's ours drowns in this. For example, there's no denying that Western media is extremely popular in the country. It's regularly consumed and has become somewhat of a standard. This to me shouldn't be compared at all. Our stories are unique. It's intertwined in our culture and it should have a standard of its own. For example, when you think of mythology, you think of Greek mythology. Like ours, theirs is complex as well. Many people, many stories. But the reason as to this is because it has a platform of its own. It's seen in various media outlets as well. Our stories can be this way if we give it a platform of its own. 13 on Netflix has somewhat helped this. It put these stories on mainstream media and thus introduced a new generation to these folklores. But if you want to raise the platform on your own, I suggest telling these stories to the little ones in your family. From memory or by reading a book, I'm sure our ancestors would appreciate it either way. This is what folklores can do. It can bring us together, and it keeps us grounded. Why did they tell the story of the Bakunawa in the first place? Because it's what our ancestors believed in. In their time, they didn't understand that the moon had phases. They believed that a serpent would fly to the moon and eat a chunk of it. When a moonless night would occur, or an eclipse, they would sing and chant for it to spit it out and give them their light back. I don't think our legends and myths are dead. I'd simply say it's going through a phase, and in time, it'll shine its light onto us once more. In other forms of media, we're seen differently. If you compare the state of our country to another, you would be able to point out 5 differences off the bat. It hurts to say, but portrayal of our people in Western media can either be a swing and a miss or a home run. You either hate it or love it. Here are some examples.
Plus, I have a perfectly fine coat that no innocent animals suffered to make.
Yeah, just some 9-year-old Filipino kids who work their fingers bloody for 12 cents an hour.
Here are 2 pictures. One is your locker, the other is a garbage dump in the Philippines. Can you tell which is which?
Vera! Do you have to do that right here?
Oh, I am so sorry. I didn't realize you wanted it to keep flooding in the Philippines.
I don't want it to keep flooding in the Philippines, Claire.
There's no way I could have said 1,000,000 words. That would have taken years. Tarantado ka talaga! Narinig ko yun, gago!
There's definitely no sugarcoating to this, but in the eyes of foreigners, we are seen as poor, in constant natural disasters, not to mention our short temper. In this module, one of the materials that made me further realize this was Nas Daily's video series about the Philippines. In this video, he stated that the Philippines is extremely cheap. He then follows up with a separate video stating that for an average Filipino, it's the complete opposite. This is what also made me realize the struggles many of us go through. It hit me that I was desensitized and that the person living in the slums is totally normal to me because it's what I see all the time. This then leads me to another takeaway from this module. Media is an extremely powerful tool. To be honest, the materials in this module were my favorite. For example, the BBC's documentary on pagpag or recycled food. Those who live in the slums take discarded food from the trash, collect them, sell them, and cook them to eat. This story was familiar to me. I was introduced to this prior to seeing it in the materials. Watching it refreshed my mind. Why weren't stories like this more known? This has been circulating for years. Did those in authority help? What is the state of the situation now? Those questions came rushing into my mind. Then it hit me. These platforms are extremely powerful. It's an influence. It isn't for normal or casual consumption, it's reality. It exposes the wrongs and the sacrifices that go unseen. Another is the piece My Family's Slave by Alex Tizon. In this piece, the writer tells about his family's nanny who moved with them from the Philippines to the United States. As much as she hated moving to a foreign land, she couldn't disobey. She needed the money and the job was somewhat stable. She couldn't go home even if she wanted to because the family refused to allow her to do so. Thus, he depicted her as a slave. It was personal stories such as these that make you reflect the minute it's over. Apart from the media being an outlet of true life, it can also be weaponized. Mike De Leon's Kangkungan showcases this. In this 5-minute documentary, De Leon covers Duterte's presidency from the beginning to what the future may possibly hold. He then transitions into Duterte's support for the Marcoses, likening him to the family. He then concludes the video with the statement,
Mga kababayan at lalo na sa inyo, mga kabataan, ngayong Mayo, bumoto na parang nakasalalay dito ang inyong kinabukasan at ang inyong buhay.
Influence. Media is a weapon. Whether you're fighting the good fight or fighting to stay in power, the media is your strongest tool. It's something that will never be taken away because after all, people will always find a way for word to get around. Sexuality in the Philippines is somewhat taboo. I learned that it is usually showcased in 3 ways, and I learned that from the materials in this module. Those 3 ways are stereotypical, coming out, and a real love story. First, the stereotypical story. An example of this is Working Becks, directed by Chris Martinez. In all honesty, this movie surprised me. Working Becks tells the story of several gay men in several situations. We as the audience see them make decisions that are ultimately life-changing. My first impression of this was that it was quite cringy. I thought it was another stereotypical movie about gay men being funny and insanely dressed and hyper-feminine. But this movie proved me wrong. It was realistic, depicting the silent struggle gay men go through. As I watched it, I thought it was brilliant in its storytelling. It was a healthy mix of drama and comedy, allowing the audience to receive it in an easy way, but also take it seriously at the same time. When I had to review this movie, the stereotypical trope was too repetitive for me. I thought that if I've seen one, I've seen them all. For years, the LGBT community has always been the butt of the joke. If not their props, or they're there to prove diversity in a still homophobic platform. But Working Becks is a stepping stone to something better. Coming out stories are always heartwarming. An example of this is Billy and Emma, directed by Samantha Lee. The movie tells the story of 2 teenagers in the mid-1990s finding themselves and falling in love. As much as it's a coming-of-age story, it includes them eventually professing their love for one another and not being afraid for others to know. Another example is Die Beautiful, directed by June R. Lana. This movie premiered in the 2016 Metro Manila Film Festival. It tells the story of a trans woman and how she lived her life extremely colorful. This is one of my favorite movies, from the cinematography to the acting. The actor's performance is absolutely astounding, and I'll never forget the dinner scene.
Akin naman yung mga yun eh.
Walang iyo dito!
gusto mo mag-ibang tao, bumili ka ng mga damit mo. Kumuha ka ng bagong ID. Baguhin mo ang pangalan mo dahil hindi ko na pagagamit sa'yo ang apelyido ko!
Pa naman, please.
Huwag ka nang babalik. Idikdik mo yan sa kukote mo, Patrick.
Ako si Trisha. My name is Trisha Echevarria from Bahamas! Trisha! Trisha! Trisha!
It was well performed and extremely raw. It was movies like this that made me realize how fast your life can change. The minute you come out, everyone's reaction is different, and it's almost unpredictable. I'd like to commend these filmmakers for taking such different reactions and making it realistic. Finally, the real love story. I'm not saying that the previous examples I've mentioned contain terrible love stories. I'm stating that there are rarely LGBT stories that don't make it the character's personality that they are that specific sexuality. For example, Game Boy's Level Up Edition aired on Netflix in 2020. It took place in modern times, so during the pandemic. The series tells the story of two boys falling in love through the internet. Like any other teenager, they have misunderstandings and go through the normal things young relationships do. What I like most about this was that the creators of the series didn't make their sexuality their personality. Granted, there was a segment of one of the characters coming out to his family. It didn't exactly change the plot. That was a heavy realization for me. I've been so used to seeing the LGBT as flouncy or loud, or using their sexuality as a trait. But the series made me think otherwise. It would be nice to see the same in other forms of entertainment. My takeaways from this course were that mistakes are normal, the importance of collaboration, and that everything has its structure. I learned that learning is a process that everyone goes through and is currently going through. I wouldn't and shouldn't be expected to know everything all at once. I learned the importance of collaboration. Bouncing off ideas with my groupmates was very refreshing because I could see their first impressions and the way that they were already thinking. Structure is key. Without this, everything would be quite a mess. It allows a guide, but every now and then, there's nothing wrong with going down your own path. The contribution and impact this course had on me is truly appreciation. Going into this, I expected myself to have a difficult time because I knew I wasn't that familiar with Philippine literature. But when I did my work, I realized it was more than that. It branched out to many platforms, and I'm extremely grateful that it did. It made me appreciate Filipino-made entertainment. I learned many things and saw these platforms as something else. It was no longer only for entertainment. I was introduced to stories I loved as a child and was introduced to socially relevant films to today. As I grow and develop more, it would help me understand that influence is stronger than it seems. It creates a ripple effect. And with this, it helps people be more exposed, whether to the uniqueness of our myths and legends, the power media can hold that's more than we think, and how people are just generally being more comfortable with themselves.